Superworm is super long. Superworm is super strong. Watch him wiggle, see him squirm. Hip hip hooray for Superworm. Those are children's author Julia Donaldson's words for her story Superworm, the eponymous invertebrate lauded for his rescue of a toad from a major road. But while I'm sorry to report that Donaldson's Superworm may be a mere work of fiction, researchers in Singapore are working with a different type of real-life superworm to save creatures here on Earth from a very different type of problem: plastic pollution.
We bought superworm from a local pet store. The superworm is very famous because they can eat and break down plastic.
That's a research fellow with Nanyang Technology University in Singapore, who's working with a team that's trying to harness the digestive qualities of these tasty little creatures. You see, studies have found that these so-called superworms, the larvae of the darkling beetle, specifically known as Zophobus atratus, thank you for asking, have bacteria inside of their guts that allows them to break down common plastics. Here's a research fellow on this study out of Singapore who spoke to the Associated Press.
Once the worms are done feeding with plastics, so this is what it looks like, they create holes. We take out the microorganisms from their gut and we put them in flasks with fresh plastics so that eventually they start growing on them and degrading them.
Now, there are plenty of reasons that we haven't yet exchanged our recycling bins for kitchen worm farms. It's hard to maintain large worm populations for one thing. This plastic processing superworm naturally takes its sweet time feasting on plastic for another. And these things quickly mature into non-plastic eating beetles, which don't eat plastic and defeat this plastic eating purpose. And that is why these scientists are working to create an artificial version of these worms' plastic processing guts. Plastic waste, of course, is a major environmental issue. As subtly noted by the UN Environmental Program, our planet is choking on plastic. And they say that today we produce 400 million tons of plastic waste annually. They anticipate that number is going to reach 1,100 million tons by 2050 if historic growth trends are followed.
We have a big plastic problem, and we need a sustainable method to take care of that problem.
That's a microbiologist who previously led superworm research out of the University of Queensland in Australia.
And we can look into nature, let's say the superworms, right, and learn from nature, learn how the worms, learn how the microbes break it down, and then we can use this method in an industrial scale. And hopefully that will help with the recycling of this large amount of plastic that we have.
So what's happening in this research out of Singapore is that hundreds of these worms are being divided into 3 groups. One control group is enjoying a steady diet of oatmeal, while 2 other experimental groups are taking after that kid in Cronenberg's Crimes of the Future and are enjoying a steady diet of plastic. Mostly polyethylene, polypropylene, and polystyrene, which aren't among this year's hottest new baby names, but are some of the most commonly used types of plastics in styrofoam and plastic bags. Here's another researcher.
Our study is one of the few studies in this region to look at the microorganisms and plastic interaction in the marine environment, and with the ultimate goal to develop a novel bioprocesses for us to manage the plastic waste well.
Plastic waste in and around Southeast Asia is polluting marine and freshwater ecosystems there, and more than half of the world's plastics are produced in the Asia-Pacific region. These researchers are hoping to figure out what's left after these worm guts degrade plastic, if whatever's left can be monetized, and if it's possible to scale up this whole worm gut digestion process at an industrial level.
Those processes can be a series of reactions to transform these plastic materials into either monomers or the relatively small molecules that can be converted to something that is even more valuable.
In the next stage of this research, this team is going to investigate whether it's possible to create the gut microbes in vitro. That's Latin for within the glass, or outside of the living organism, without having to involve these worms at all. While nobody's really rooting for worm unemployment, finding a way to harness these superworm guts that cut down on plastic waste could be a huge boon for our environment. Though, as that microbiologist from before notes, superworms may just be one solution to our global plastic problem.
To take care of our plastic waste crisis, we A, need to use less plastic, B, we need to shift to products that are more sustainable, like coffee cups that we can reuse multiple times, and C, we need to increase our recycling effort, and for that we can use the superworm, this natural method to use superworms, their microbes and their enzymes to recycle plastic.